Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, the Compliance Evangelist, and welcome to episode 37 of This Week in FCPA for the week ending January 27th, 2017, the Jeff Sessions edition. As always, I'm joined by Mr. Translations, Jay Rosen, and this week we have a fast-paced episode where we discuss several different things. First of all, the lead judge in the Brazilian car wash investigation died in a plane crash. We consider the conspiracy theories. We talk about two individuals charged in the Och-Ziff matter by the Securities and Exchange Commission. Jay talks about the announcement of the White House compliance team. Jeff Sessions indicates he will continue robust FCPA enforcement via answers to written questions to the Senate Judiciary Committee. We discuss a $7 million whistleblower award made by the Securities and Exchange Commission to three persons, and the upcoming whistleblower conference in New York City that talks about whistleblowers from a variety of angles, prosecution of whistleblower complaints, defense, and the government side of things. We take a look at China in the context of its, once again, leading the countries for FCPA cases, and cite to an article by Eric Carlson about the two invoice requirement and what it might mean. We take a look at a series of cases from 2016, which help define the phrase anything of value in FCPA cases. And finally, Jay gives us a preview of his Jay Rosen weekend report on the continued lessons learned from the Rolls-Royce Global Anti-Corruption Enforcement Action. This is Tom Fox. Thank you very much for listening to This Week in FCPA. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and welcome to This Week in FCPA for the week ending January 27th, 2017, the Sessions edition. As always, I'm joined by Mr. Translations, Jay Rosen from It Never Rains in Sunny California. Jay, welcome.
Tom, thanks. Thanks for having me. And we got a lot of FCPA, ethics and compliance, good stuff, so we should just probably launch right in.
Well, we've had some actually breaking news, not that we broke the news, but we've had breaking news that the Trump White House has announced its compliance team. So why don't you tell us about that?
Yep. So this just hit the press this morning, and there's a gentleman named Stefan Passatino, and he previously had served as chair of Denton's political law team. His experience comes with representing corporations, special interest groups, political figures, and others. And on Wednesday, he was appointed to serve under the White House counsel and ex-Jones Day partner, Donald McGahn. And he is going to be responsible for, setting up some bright lines from an ethics and compliance perspective for the White House. He also joins lawyers who are there from Cozen O'Connor and Covington and Burling. So with everything that's been going down in the first couple weeks of the Trump presidency, there did seem to be some confusion between an ethics and compliance perspective on what the duties of the new president are. So I think this seems to be a step in the right direction. In the press release, which we will get up in the notes, there is positive press on this guy from both Newt Gingrich and also from the other side from former DNC chair Dean. So I think that we should take this as a step in the right direction.
Are you saying that simply because Newt Gingrich and Howard Dean agreed on anything, or is there a substantive reason for your thinking this is a step in the right direction?
The former, not the latter.
Well, we also had a very interesting, if not predictable announcement or statement, rather, by Jeff Sessions. And I have to say that for all those people out there who wondered if FCPA was going away because Donald Trump had said it was a terrible law several years ago, Jeff Sessions, in written testimony to the Senate Judiciary Committee, said the following: "If confirmed as Attorney General, I will enforce all laws, including the Foreign Corrupt Practice Act and the International Bribery Act of 1998 as appropriate based on the facts and circumstances of each case. Now, Jay, on the one hand, that would be exactly what you would expect someone to say. But if you think back to comments that Mike Volkov has made, both in his blog and in our Everything Compliance podcast, and indeed our first ebook on the potential enforcement of the FCPA, which was published through Corporate Compliance Insights, Volkov has maintained that Jeff Sessions is a law and order guy. Now, you can disagree with his politics on, perhaps the Civil Rights Act or those sorts of issues, but as a law and order guy, those people tend to see things really in black and white, and when they see a violation of law, they will prosecute that violation of law. So I'm not surprised by a statement, but if you tie it back into what Volkov has shared with us, when you have that kind of person, really a no-nonsense person, it wouldn't surprise you that that person would prosecute bribery if it violates U.S. law. And if we further take the step that there's some indication that he will lessen the use of deferred prosecution agreements, I think that really doesn't so much change the calculus for corporations, but I think it makes compliance programs even more important because if a decision is simply go, no go, there's no room for an interim step. There's no room for a probationary agreement. There's no room for, well, let's see if you can make it 3 years and not have a violation, and then we'll give you a pass. It's either we prosecute or we don't. And the two problems I see with that is, since it's binary, the investigations may tend to lengthen out actually and become longer and indeed go on forever, because no prosecutor is probably going to want to shut down something when additional evidence might come to the fore where a company hasn't agreed to accept responsibility for it, number one. And number two, any violation really means any violation. And if there's a violation and a prosecutor wants to go after a company, he puts it in line. It goes to a grand jury, or they file the appropriate pretrial documents, and that company just waits. And that's one of the things that drives CEOs and shareholders and boards of directors crazy, is uncertainty. And when you have either a criminal charge hanging over your head or even a potential criminal charge hanging over your head, it's difficult to marshal the resources inside of the company to keep going full speed, but also the market will sanction you for having that bit of unknown. So Volkov told us yesterday, be careful what you ask for, you just might get it. And if you're in a world with no DPAs and prosecutors can't take interim steps, we may be seeing not so much a large number of new prosecutions, but cases just lengthening out in terms of their investigations, all of which is going to put even more pressure on compliance programs to get it right, so that if you have to go in front of the government, whether through self-disclosure or other, you want to be able to say, yes, we have this problem, but here we've cleared it up and we've done it, and we're going to continue to monitor it going forward. If you don't have that in place, you may find yourself on the go line for a prosecution.
So does that mean, if we kind of extrapolate that line of thought, does that mean we're actually going to see some case law develop in the next 4 years on FCPA?
Well, I'm not sure it would less necessarily lead to that, because the other thing corporations want is certainty. And even if you have to plead guilty, if you'll notice, when companies plead guilty in FCPA cases, their stock price actually tends to go up. That may sound counterintuitive, but not really, because markets respond to certainty. And markets respond to, yeah, you've done something wrong, but what's your plan to get out of it? Well, a guilty plea is part of that plan. And if a guilty plea includes a fine and remedial action going forward, because you can have a guilty plea and still have obligations in the form of a monitorship or self-monitorship with a best practices compliance program that you need to implement going forward, that can all be a part of a guilty plea, in addition to a fine and penalty. So when you see companies plead guilty or secure some sort of resolution with the DOJ, their stock tends to go up. And companies, I don't think, are going to be more aggressive in going to trial for the same reasons they're not aggressive in going to trial now.
Very interesting stuff. We'll have to definitely keep an eye on this. But the other thing, just a little tidbit in those written responses from Senator Sessions, he also said he would be taking a very keen eye on M&A activity going forward, and especially in the healthcare space. And we know that's where we see so much of this potential violations. And I know we're going to talk about healthcare in China in a little bit. So that's another interesting point to be on the lookout for.
So, Jay, we get to go into one of our favorite topics is the off-world of conspiracies. And
yes.
In the vein of, you can't make this stuff up, or does art imitate life, or does life imitate art? Unfortunately, the lead judge in the Brazilian car wash case died in a plane crash earlier this month. Judge Teorio Zavaesky, if I've butchered that, I'm sure, was killed when his plane crashed when he was returning from a holiday weekend. And, of course, anyone who grew up in the Kennedy era, the era of Kennedy's assassination, the Nixon era, or any other era, probably after World War II, conspiracies are a part of American everyday cultural existence. So the speculation...
Trilateral Commission. You hear an echo?
Trilateral Commission. How was your experience in Davos this year, Jay?
This what did it say, that he was less than 2 miles from his final destination, and that's when the crash occurred?
So I think our audience probably knows you're a recovering screenwriter, and my question to you as a recovering screenwriter is, if you had written this up as fiction, would it have been too outlandish for a studio to purchase?
I don't think too outlandish. I mean, there's that kind of joke in Buddy Pictures that you got one officer and he's officer dead meat, and you know that he's going to die within the first 10 minutes of the movie, and his partner's going to avenge him. So I think there are just certain tropes that come up in stories, and if they were making the movie of this guy, you could start off with him getting on the airplane and getting ready to go to his vacation, and then we start flashing back to a gas station somewhere in Brazil, and I think it completely makes sense. And it reminds me of stuff like that Russian diplomat who was poisoned with plutonium. So they say you can't make this stuff up, and truth is better than the fiction, and this one kind of fills it on both counts.
Well, as a writer, I'm unfortunately guided by the trope that you can't make this stuff up because fiction has to make sense. So anyway, we're going to have to watch that and see what's going to occur, if anything, what it will mean for the car wash investigation, whether the politicians will be able to shut it down, and I guess more will be revealed.
Yeah, especially because they need to find a replacement for this guy, right?
Right.
And the former president, who's now president again, will be tasked with doing that.
So we had a rare SEC complaint filed against two individuals from the Och-Ziff case. And the Securities and Exchange Commission filed in federal court this past week, charging Michael Cohen, who is the head of Och-Ziff's European office in London, and Vanya Barros, who worked under Mr. Cohen, with causing tens of millions of dollars in bribes to be paid to officials in Africa. And this comes on the heels, obviously, of the major first private equity resolution under the FCPA, where we had the CFO and the CEO agreeing both to penalties under the FCPA. So, and of course, we still have the Samuel Mbembe criminal matter under the FCPA. He was the Gabonese fixer hired by Och-Ziff to fix things throughout Niger, Chad, Guinea, and other countries. So a rare SEC filing yet, perhaps with the individual accountability memo, i.e. the Yates memo, released in September 2015. Some of those prosecutions are now coming to fore, even though this is not a DOJ, but an SEC prosecution. And I guess, Jay, if I could maybe tie it back into Jeff Sessions, one of the things that has struck me about the dialogue is the DOJ could certainly pivot to individuals. And with Sessions being a law and order guy, if he sees criminal activity and his boss wants to pull up the gas on companies, I could see individuals being prosecuted much more heavily and intensely under a Jeff Sessions administration at the Department of Justice, and it'd be completely consistent with what Sally Yates says, and indeed Leslie Caldwell said, which was, we will hold individuals accountable.
Well, it's certainly interesting. I guess the question that I would ask in my cynical conspiracy theory way is, could the DOJ start proceedings against a company and then they decide to, to not build a factory in Mexico, and then would those charges suddenly go away? There seems to be it's going to be a lot of winning and a lot of deal making. So I wonder how that figures into the docket that's going to be coming up in the next 4 years.
Certainly, very good questions. So, Jay, we had a big whistleblower award this week, or big for perhaps me, not for you. It's only $7 million. As a noted screenwriter. Were you a member of the Screenwriters Guild?
Yes, I'm a lapsed member now, but it's a closed shop here in Hollywood. So once you sell something to one of the major studios, you need to join the union. So I was a member of the Writers Guild of America West.
Well, then perhaps we should change your moniker from Mr. Translations to Comrade. Comrade Rosen, although, make Russia great again. But the Whistleblower Award was 3 individuals who split an award, and this really continues the trend. Since 2012, there have been over $149 million paid to 41 whistleblowers. The biggest award was $30 million in 2014. The second biggest was last summer at $22 million. And even in November, there was a $20 million whistleblower award paid. So I think one of the conclusions you can certainly draw is the Dodd-Frank whistleblower program with the Securities and Exchange Commission has brought a wealth and plethora of information to the SEC, which they have actionable information, which they have utilized going forward. I spoke to Greg Keating earlier this week, and he's on a podcast, and he's leading a whistleblower and compliance conference later in late February in New York City. And I find that conference is focusing solely on whistleblowers and compliance. Incredibly timely conference. Greg is a defense practitioner side representing corporations, but he's going to have Sean McCasey and Jordan Thomas there, who work more on the plaintiff side. He's going to have government regulators from both the SEC, Department of Labor, and one other agency which also utilizes whistleblowers. There's going to be compliance practitioners, GCs and CCOs, who talk about the company's internal response. So I found the conference timely, particularly around this award. And this is one thing that I think will continue very strongly to be used by the government, because frankly, if they're paying out these kinds of awards, remember that's only 10 to 30% total fine and penalty. So they're getting some pretty good information from some sources.
Now, we've got too much spinning around in my head right now. Wasn't there a headline this morning about somebody in the Trump administration wanting to severely curtail Dodd-Frank?
That's not just this morning. And earlier you said the early weeks of the Trump administration. We are in the first 7 days of the Trump administration. So What a week.
It reminds me of Millie and Michaela when we get in the car for a long trip and they say, "Are we there yet?" So I was just trying to get us closer to our destination.
But, that's something we've consistently heard from former candidate Trump and now the Trump administration is Dodd-Frank. But if you really consider kind of Matt Kelly's take on it, his take is that there will be a perhaps loosening of capital requirements, meaning that banks don't have to have as high reserves. The stress testing may lessen, and the changes that the politicians seem to be fomenting is around loosening up requirements for capital. There's not been anything yet talked about in terms of reducing the enforcement environment, or particularly around non-capital, non-banks, those sorts of issues. So at this point, I don't think the whistleblower office or the whistleblower program is in danger, really, of lessening when you have these kinds of awards. And clearly on the uptake of both information presented to the SEC and the quality of the awards that are being made. So, at this point, I don't think so.
Right. So let's take it into the home stretch now. We've got a couple stories about China and anything of value. So pick which one you'd like, and we can jump on to that.
Sure. So I've been mining the Sherman and Sterling 2017 FCPA digest for some of the points that they thought were significant in 2016. And one of them was that China continues to be the country which sustains or leads to, I should say, the most FCPA violations. And that happened again over the past year. And at least the Sherman and Sterling had a variety of reasons. One, China's size, both in terms of geography and population. Two, China's role in the global economy. Three, the similarity between bribery schemes arising out of China, gifts, travel, entertainment. Four, the fact that many Chinese-related bribery schemes involve the same industry, healthcare, life sciences. And I would add that also we've seen a large crackdown internally by the Chinese officials, and I think this has led to more information coming to the U.S. Enforcement authorities because, believe it or not, there's actually pretty good communications between prosecutors of those countries around anti-corruption compliance. That really ties into a blog post that Eric Carlson put up this week, where on the FCPA blog, where the country of China announced a 2 invoice requirement around invoices for pharmaceutical and medical services, medical care products. The significance is that there's a almost Byzantine taxing protocol in China, and by having a 2 invoice system, you hopefully can do away with or at least lessen the fake invoices that have plagued many companies and have been utilized as pools to draw pots of money from to pay bribes. So now we see a Chinese government procedural response in addition to the quite extensive anti-corruption enforcement that the Chinese government has engaged in. So I think this is a welcome sign. Sherman and Sterling really does a great job pointing out these highlights, but it leads to clearly review by the Chinese government and steps taken by the Chinese government. So perhaps, and I know, Jay, you have consistently talked about U.S. companies coming to grief in China and steps they need to take, whether it's involved in a joint venture, going into a joint venture, purchasing a company, or even open up a distributorship, and why those steps are so important. Time for Darth Vader to speak. So that really leads me to...
Yeah, I guess one other thing I would add to that, and I'm just feeling really cynical today. I had a lot of coffee. I would put my money on somebody being able to come up with a workaround once this gets established in China. So I don't know if it's ultimately going to solve anything. it initially sounds like there's going to be a way to cut out some of those extra distributors. And I think what Eric posits in the article is it might lead to a round of consolidation there. And so I think on the face it looks good, but I was just thinking the other night, it's like there's always going to be a new way to get around these, right? If somebody wants to curry favor bad enough, they're going to come up with a new thing. So the airplane ticket was, 2 or 3 years ago. So I'm just kind of wondering what's the next workaround that we're going to see, because I think to all the points that Sherman and Sterling said in that report, China still is a nexus for a lot of these potential situations going forward.
The other thing, though, you're absolutely right to raise that concern. The other thing is that Eric pointed out that this may lead to more electronic billing and less opportunity for interference, if I can use that word. Jay, next I'd like to raise something that came up from a couple of enforcement actions from 2016, and that involves the term in the FCPA, anything of value. And I would like to just posit that it appears the Department of Justice has taken the position that anything of value literally means anything. And I would point you to the Qualcomm and JP Morgan Chase hiring cases, where in both cases, the hiring of sons and daughters of state-owned official employees or foreign officials was deemed to be anything of value for FCPA prosecution purposes. In our podcast recording yesterday of Everything Compliance, which will go up in the next week or so, Jonathan Armstrong raised a very interesting point of he was in New York for the recording, and he named the hotel he was staying at, and he wondered out loud if it was a 5-star hotel, would it be something of value under the FCPA? And the answer is if it is deemed to be excessive or exceptional, it may well be. And so I think this is going to lead businesses to have to take a much more nuanced view of what something, a gift, entertainment, or other might be. And in the realm of hiring, we have not yet had any cases where, or I should say these two cases, it was pretty clear the reason the sons and daughters were hired was to influence the government officials. At JP Morgan, they tied the hirings directly to contracts. At Qualcomm, they hired individuals who were clearly not qualified to work there and would not have, were recommended in the hiring process not to be hired, yet were overridden by the business guys. So what's going to happen when we have a qualified individual who went to the appropriate school, has business experience, goes for hire at you name the company, and they are hired? Will that be something of value? I would argue the answer is no, but I think companies are going to have to look at it very closely and tread carefully.
Yeah, and I mean, even in one of these situations, there was not a direct tie to the hiring and to the ultimate potential bribery that happened. So there still is kind of like a nebulous area there, as you're talking about if there are qualified people, or which one was the case, Tom, where they gave a donation to a charity, but they couldn't really tie it in that there was any ill-gotten gains from that.
That was actually a different case. That was VimpleCom from February of 2016.
Okay, so I mean, there still are a lot of those things, but I guess these things like SEOs, state-owned, or SOEs, state-owned entities, and now anything of value, the lexicon of FCPA and ethics and compliance is consistently evolving, and these three matters really show how broadly anything of value can be interpreted.
Well, Jay, unfortunately, we're near the end of our time, but I wanted to know if you could give our listeners just a hint of what the Jay Rosen Weekend Report might discuss this week.
Well, based upon the Everything Compliance podcast that we recorded with Jonathan Armstrong, Mike Volkov, Matt Kelly, and the two of us. This week, I'm going to give my own take on Rolls-Royce, and I'm calling it Rolls-Royce Takes Global Anti-Corruption to New International Heights and Potential Next Steps for a CCO whose company has bid or worked with Rolls-Royce. So I will put that up sometime today.
And for our listeners, next week begins the month of February, where Jay and I take a traditional look at the Oscar nominees through the prism of compliance and ethics. So next week, we're going to start our This Week in FCPA Oscar series. So I hope if you've enjoyed today, you will tune in next week and then follow us through the month of February, where we look at Oscars and compliance. So Jay, till next Friday, stay dry and it never rains in Southern California.
Great. And everybody, thank you for spending some time with us on this podcast and taking a look at the FCPA week that was.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of the FCPA Compliance Report. If you have any questions for Jay or myself, please let us know. We'd love to hear from you. And if you have listened to this podcast on iTunes, I would greatly appreciate it if you would rate us, as it would help our rankings. This is Tom Fox. Thank you very much for listening to This Week in FCPA.